Stephanie, a lot of times people in this region of the country or any region of the country that gets a hurricane, they think that the country forgets about them soon after landfall because you see so much hype about the actual event. And then a lot of people forget this post-traumatic event that people are trying to pick up the pieces after a major weather event. Yeah.
Yeah, and here in this video, it's important to note, that freight train being knocked over and these trees being obliterated, that's the wind factor of it. But when you see just the amount of water and the force of water as it moved through that home, largely battered by waves from storm surge that's moved through, and that's where you see a lot of this disrupted soil and all this under this building, likely to be more of a factor from the storm surge in those it almost, it brings the Gulf of Mexico in, and that force of water is so very destructive. It's not something that people can really feel as tangible. When you describe storm surge, you're like, oh, okay, some water, some flooding. But really, when you have these strong winds, imagine what they do to the trees. Now, when they're pushing the Gulf of Mexico inland, it's quite a force to contend with. And that's why we were happy to find out when we were looking at the reports there that the tide is actually on its way out. That's always the best case scenario, I think, when these storms are moving onshore, to have the tide going out, because when you have storms that move in, and I believe that was the case with Laura, I think we were between or soon after high tide when that storm came through. So you have the water level already going up because the tide's coming in, and then you have that storm surge on top of that from the strength of the winds churning up the water and just pushing them inland. So it just goes to show with the damage we're seeing here, it's not just winds blowing roofs off homes or scattering debris and toppling down trees and everything. That's one aspect of it. But the force of water when it comes to storm surge, and again, with the size of this storm, that impact is felt by a wider scope of people, although not the same for everyone. It still is something to contend with as folks experience this storm along the Gulf Coast.
Right. And I think, the reason why I wanted to show this video, and Damon, you can go back to WSI because we've been talking about storm surge. Storm surge video or storm surge damage, that's a tongue twister, is very different from wind damage. So water tends to bend things, and wind damage tends to twist. So when you're looking at when you were looking at that video, and I wanted to show you Hurricane Laura because again, this area is already incredibly fragile. I would venture to guess that most of that video that we just saw, most of that area is probably relatively untouched because it's very rural down there in that particular area where Laura came in, and getting crews to restore power, to rebuild roofs. You have to file insurance claims. There's all kinds of red tape. So I really am concerned about the folks that live there that have to deal with even a lesser form of a hurricane, still a powerful force of nature. And I do think that there's going to be, we're going to see, unfortunately, some really heartbreaking video tomorrow, when crews get out and assess the damage, because this, especially in this area, we're really concerned in Vermilion Bay, in that Lake and New Iberia region where we think the center is going to come in, that there is just going to be, more structural damage that didn't take much, is not going to take much to take down because of what that area was dealt with, Laura. So we were talking about surge. I wanted to show you this because the Hurricane Center did update this product when we started to see Delta get a little less intense. So now the storm surge is at its highest estimate is around 3 to 6 feet. And Lake Arthur, just to get your bearings, so that's where our storm chaser Jim Tang is. You can see it there on the center left of your screen. Cameron back towards the west, and New Iberia, Vermilion Bay just ahead of it. That's where we think there's going to be some inundation in the neighborhood of 3 to 6 as well. And then as we head through the Morgan City into Houma, and then back over towards Grand Isle, up to 1 to 3 maybe in some of those pockets there. Some of the rivers and tributaries are definitely flooding. Looks like Lake Pontchartrain's going to do okay. Everything looking pretty good for those folks. And then over towards Mobile, we're looking at things looking pretty good there as well. So that's at least on the current thinking, and looks like that's going to verify. Of course, we'll have a better estimate. We'll get some official numbers from folks down there. And I'm actually going to fast forward past this because these couple of these numbers are off because now the Hurricane Center's bumped down that surge just a bit. So let me fast forward. We'll get that updated for you the next time we come up.
For folks there.
Yeah.
It's wonderful
Yeah.
that's what you want to see in this kind of case with the forecast, see that downward trend. Not to bring in a boy cried wolf kind of situation, but these things are difficult to predict. The National Hurricane Center does such a phenomenal job that we've become just so accustomed to them getting it right every single time. And boy, have they done a phenomenal job this season. But if you think just 10 years ago, or even farther back from that, from the era of Hurricane Andrew, which hit South Florida in 1992, to now, our 5-day cone is more accurate than the 3-day cone of that time frame. So we've gotten so much better at forecasting these things that these small variables, to have that bend in our favor, is just a testament to how far some of that science has come in terms of tropical meteorology. But we're going to continue to see this storm deteriorating there, and it's going to be really the silver lining of this repeat storm coming on shore here in the northern Gulf Coast.
Yeah, it's the best case scenario that we could hope for everybody down there. And what I've got up now is a future cast. Well, Stephanie was talking, I just kind of toggled through it. So you can see, again, the path. If you remember those storms, and I was down in South Florida during Andrew, I remember it really well. The paths were double that size of what you see there in that blue path right there. So that's, again, through the efforts of drop sondes and constant flights in these hurricanes with the hurricane hunters. We show their videos so much. I am such a huge fan of those guys and gals, because they have such an important part of this component of trying to forecast these things. And as Stephanie has mentioned, it's not easy. I see so many people on Twitter or on social media, Laura was a case in point. So many people said that the Weather Service and the Hurricane Center overshot the storm surge. I remember the Hurricane Center getting beat up and saying, hey, you guys said it was going to be 17 to 20 feet, and it was 17 foot. They found a storm surge of 17 feet in part of Louisiana, but it takes days for them to go back to those areas. They have to survey the ground, they have to look at the debris field, and then they look at the debris that's on buildings that have still stood and survived the hurricane. So they found a home that was in the wildlife sanctuary there, and I forget the city, but it was they found debris on the side of the house there, and it was 17.2 feet. So it takes a while for the Weather Service to go and assess that stuff. But the Hurricane Center, we can't tell them enough. You're not going to hear any bad info from us coming out of here that they don't do a fantastic job, because without them, there would be nobody that would be forecasting the level of skill that this takes. So, we try to toot their horn, and I think we do a good job, and I think everybody should, because a lot of folks try to do Monday morning quarterbacking when really this is one of the toughest jobs in the world. If you had to ask me in terms of certainly meteorology, I'm not going to go out there and say everything out there, but I wanted to show this because Stephanie was talking about the lopsided nature of the hurricane. You can see the wind field. See how there's just a little bit on the left side there? Let me grab the pointer. So we just see a little bit of the tropical storm force winds over here in Texas, but this huge swath that's on the east and the south side of the hurricane. So that just, again, plays into the fact that the core of this hurricane has not been a classic donut that we see in these stronger hurricanes, the more powerful hurricanes, which, again, great news. And you can see the legend up there. The reds are the hurricane force winds, but it's just that small northeastern eye that has those core winds of 100 miles an hour. And then as we forward this in time through the overnight, you can see the wind radii shrink, because obviously it's going to get weaker. And then as it gets into Mississippi, we're not going to be talking about winds in the neighborhood of hurricane strength, probably strong tropical storm and gusts. So I'm going to back this up. And Steph, if you want to talk about that too, the lopsided nature of this particular hurricane. I can't drag it up, but you can at least see it.
Well, yeah, just like you were pointing out there, as you see it advance with that weakening, it shrinks so quick. I think the earlier forecast that came out with the last full advisory was saying that within 12 hours we'd see tropical storm strength. So that kind of matches right up with this graphic that we're showing, that yellow area shrinking down to such a narrow a field there as it passes the Mississippi River into northwest Mississippi. So that's great news for folks there, that by the time the storm moves inland, the systems steering it are effectively cutting off all fuel and all exhaust. And with that, that's really going to help limit the severe impact of this once it moves inland to where we're just dealing with some gusty winds and heavy downpours of a more tolerable nature for folks inland as opposed to on the coastline there. But we got the severe weather risk outlined where we got the marginal risk there in the darker shade of green, a slight risk for the tip or the toe of Louisiana. I'm telling you, I described the state as a boot, so that's what we're going with that. So folks here, as we head on in through the rest of tonight, still going to see those rough conditions until Laura passes. Excuse me, wow. I'm still going back to that Delta. Delta passes. But the better part being here, the speed of the storm moving so quickly. I mean, I was talking about this earlier, that 14 miles per hour, that's pretty speedy for a tropical system, right? But, anyone who's had to drive on the road at 14 miles per hour, that feels pretty agonizingly slow. So that's where the dichotomy comes in here, where these storms are moving through very quickly, but for those experiencing the storm on the ground, it feels like it takes quite a while to get through that nasty weather. And so it's great that the storm's forward speed will continue to be pretty brisk here and carried across inland areas pretty quick as it gets absorbed up into the trough there. But it's going to be a pretty busy night for folks here.
Yes, absolutely. And someone was asking, I was just looking real quick in the chat here, Stephanie, maybe we'll take a look at some of these. If Damien, you want to go ahead and maybe pop that up. Someone was asking, are there any current tornado warnings? And there aren't any tornado warnings ongoing, but I do have the warnings toggled on. We can go back to those in just a second. But Stephanie, I don't know if you can read the questions on your end. So that was from Colin on YouTube, was asking, are there any tornado warnings? There aren't yet.
The screen's a bit small for me to read them, but I can hear you reading them out here.
Okay, let's see. Okay, this is Sandy's asking. Okay, so she's asking, where does my radar escape to during a huge hurricane? Well, luckily for us, we're in Orlando. Yeah. I will say, though, we had 2004, it kind of caught everybody off guard. And I was here during Charlie that year. The 3 hurricanes came through, Jean and Francis as well. But we're inland. We're 70 miles from the coast, so we're pretty safe. Stephanie is actually up in Jacksonville right now. And Stephanie, better question would be for you, where do you guys go when you've got a hurricane warning?
Yeah, that's tough. We've been through a couple up here with all of us last year with Dorian and the initial tracks, trying to chart what are we going to do with that and plan ahead. But personally here at a home base, we are we're inland of the metro area, and we're well west of the St. Johns River and all that. So when it comes to inland things, we had Irma when it went right up the peninsula. The precise angle of where we are, we were able to safely observe the storm from the patio. But yeah, it gets hairy, and that's part of putting together your hurricane plan when the season begins. What will I do if this scenario happens, or what if we have this kind of storm happening? When will we evacuate? Those are questions you gotta pose to you and your family and get that squared away. And that's on top of having your kit ready. What relatives can we go stay with if we have to leave for a storm? Those are all the questions that you got to review with your family and your loved ones at the beginning of the season, and try to figure out, all right, what's our game plan if we've got to act? And so that's why we like to tell you to prepare at the beginning of the season, because when you're under the stress of a storm coming through, and I can only imagine what the folks in southern Louisiana and eastern Texas are dealing with when, this is the second month in a row we've got a storm coming through. You kind of got to shift gears with that plan on the fly. So, these are the kinds of things that you don't want to have to think about. But if you have a plan in advance, it's much easier to act accordingly, and kind of takes that stress down just a notch, on top of the fact that, hey, you're dealing with a natural disaster. That's put you at risk here a little bit. But Sandy, thanks for staying with us and following on all these updates. We appreciate you always supporting us and keeping us in the loop. And hey, anybody else out there, you've got questions, drop them down for us. We love to be here as a source of information for you. We're not here to try to hype things up or scare you or anything like that. We just want to be helpful and present the information as we see it with our experience and what we know about the tropics, and try to bring you through all that. And Leslie, great that you're here, and we're waiting for this landfall. That again,
I know now it
really
won't happen.
puts in perspective that slowness. It's a hurry up and wait game.
Yes, it's like watching the pot to boil. I mean, now that we started the stream saying, "Hey, it's going to make landfall within this hour," and we're still here. But it's mighty close, and you know we'll stay on here a bit longer and see if we get an official call from the Hurricane Center. Do have a couple more questions I thought were really good. Another one from Sandy on YouTube was asking, "Do we get tropical cyclones, hurricanes that make landfall after season?" Absolutely, 100% we do. A lot of times, and I'll hand it over to you, Steph, in a second. But a lot of times, we'll get extra tropical cyclones or subtropical, so they don't quite meet the criteria of a true tropical hurricane, but we get hybrid storms. Those are more common, but we absolutely can get storms in the month of December. It's much more unusual, and I think almost every month except maybe January. I'd have to double check, but I think almost every other month and maybe February there has been some type of extratropical or subtropical, a hybrid storm that has formed and has impacted the U.S. So absolutely 100% it happens. We don't see those Cape Verde storms happen. We're not talking about major Cat 4, Cat 5s outside the season, but it does for sure happen without a doubt.
And something that we were talking about with the comparison of the only other time we've gone into the Greek alphabet. So in 2005, that was the first time we did it, new territory, and we made it all the way up to Zeta, which I believe was a subtropical storm, if I'm not mistaken. So that's 2 names down the road from where we are with Delta. So that was later in the year. Zeta was the last storm of the season, formed on December 30th, and was kind of a fish storm out in the ocean, and dissipated finally on January 6th. So, and even this season, when we were doing our initial kind of introduction to the hurricane season for folks and getting everybody prepared, we were dealing with our 3rd named storm. So it just goes to show that the tropics don't always play by the rule book here. And, some notable October storms that we've dealt with. We've been talking about how the cooler sea surface temperatures in the Gulf of Mexico, relatively cooler, because, everybody knows it's bathwater, it's very warm. But for tropical systems that are very specific, they like that 82-degree mark. When you're in the upper 70s, that's not good enough for these systems, if I can personify them like that. But some notable October storms. So we've got this one. We had... Dorian was in September, but before that, Matthew was an October storm. Michael was an October storm. I believe Sandy was also an October storm.
Yep, it sure was.
All of those, all of those different in their own way. So fall's the transition season. It's not the same across the board like what you might expect in summer when that heat is ramping up. So it just goes to show that that's why we don't like to compare these storms. But in this case, where we had Laura come through recently, that's an easy guide for us to kind of we'd be remiss if we didn't at least touch on the similarities between what we're seeing with Delta now, Leslie.
Yeah, and I think that's why I wanted to show that video again with Laura to kind of show the fragile nature of the landscape there in Louisiana. Because I'm sure we're going to see on Twitter and social media tomorrow that was a nothing storm, or there's going to be without a doubt there's going to be a criticism. But yes, but unless you're living there and those places that we showed you, I guarantee you that some of the structures that we just showed you in that video, they are not going to be there tomorrow. The infrastructure is so fragile down there. It's not going to take much. Winds of 80 to 90 miles an hour, where we're expecting those winds to be in that range for a sustained period of time, will easily topple down, compromised structures that have already been damaged by one hurricane. Another question we got on Facebook, which I thought was a good one. Again, let me get her name. I apologize. Renee. Well, it's not a question, but she's in Baton Rouge. I'm sorry, Gonzales, Louisiana, which is just southeast of Baton Rouge, and she says she's getting gusts up to 50 miles an hour. She posted that on Facebook about 30 minutes ago. But Max had a good question on Facebook. He's saying, "Do you think this will be the last storm of the year?" And Max, we certainly don't have a crystal ball, but I would venture to guess no. There has been.
Hope so.
I mean, 2020 has just proven us
Ooh.
time and time again that there's all kinds of firsts. So I am going to say probably not. We're probably not done with the season yet. Hopefully we're going to see much weaker storms, and we're going to see these hybrid storms if we have to deal with anything. Whether something comes back to the U.S. or not, nobody knows. Will we see something in the Atlantic Basin? Yeah, I think there's a pretty good chance. There's something out there right now that's got about a 20% chance in the deep Atlantic Basin that just came off of Africa. We'll see. It's not August, September. Those are where those Cabo Verde, Cape Verde storms that typically can cross the transatlantic there and really produce dangerous hurricanes. That's not the time of year for those. But I think we'll probably see something else. Steph, what do you think?
Like you mentioned, I'm now remembering a comment that I saw on one of our earlier lives that was done here. Somebody posed a question after the stream ended, asking, why do we always see storms come off the coast of Africa, or was that the only place that they come from? I'm paraphrasing the question. But that's not the case. For instance, this storm didn't come from there. Typically, we have seasons for where we expect the storm origin to happen. And, in October, it's not uncommon to see these storms being churned out of the Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico near the Yucatan Peninsula where Delta formed. It was in the Northwest Caribbean there, south and west of the Cayman Islands and Jamaica. So the season's right. That's about where they start churning up. Typically, we see these forms south of us. I like to say south in the Atlantic, south of the contiguous U.S. and the Caribbean, because we've got that belt of thunderstorms that's always going around the equator, the ITCZ. And from there, it's like a little seed that kind of comes off into the ocean of low pressure. It's some disturbed weather, a trough that turns into low pressure, gets better organized. It builds on those tropical characteristics. All of a sudden, we've got a depression. And if it survives the environment, well, then we kind of get into the situation where we are with tropical storms and hurricanes and all that. But that's why we like to say, once again, each of these storms, each of these scenarios is unique. And we can draw parallels, but they are like individual seeds, and a storm comes out of them. And we've got one area of interest out. I believe it's in the Caribbean. Is that right, Leslie? That area of interest with a low chance of development from the National Hurricane Center? I know it's a ways out.
Yeah, the one I was looking at here, I've got the Hurricane Center's website popped open, and still no, the one I'm talking about still in the Central Atlantic, not the one that's in the Caribbean. So this one's, well, I just happened to pop it up real quick. So that one, it's got about a 20% chance. It's a couple hundred miles west of the Cabo Verdes, and so it's Central Atlantic. I could pull it up here real quick if I can. Let me see if I can expand this out. I've got the sea surface temperatures up. Yeah, I can. Okay, so hang on. I'll show you roughly where it is. It is roughly right about here. So, several hundred miles away from the Leeward and the Windward Islands, and it's 20% chance now, so that's pretty low. But we'll see. Climatologically, as Stephanie was saying,
we've got the. I don't think we can see what you're talking about, Leslie, because we've got the app up. Let's see if we can pull up our graphics so folks can see what Leslie's talking about here.
Oh, yep. Sorry. Yep,
so,
I didn't.
Thankfully, way out there.
Yeah. So, Stephanie was starting to say, and you can keep on WSI, Damien, for a little bit, because I'm going to go back to this. We're going to talk about these for a couple minutes, the graphics. Climatologically, this is not a favored area. It's back towards, as Stephanie was saying, the Caribbean, Gulf. Those are the zones that we look at the end of hurricane season, which we're kind of getting there now. We're in that zone of, a month and a half left. So this is not a favored area, but you never, ever say never, especially this year. But let's, we talked about these ocean temperatures, and let's talk about the structure of this hurricane a little bit, Stephanie, and I'll talk on some of these sea surface temperatures, because we talked about that it was a little bit cooler here, on the just off the coast here, the continental shelf, just a tad cooler than, and I'm just kind of hug the coast here in the upper 70s, and people probably are saying, that's not that big of a difference from 84, but it is. These little nuances, when you add that to this shear that we've been talking about, that southwest shear, and the component that it's already interacting with land, that's enough to disrupt the core. So, you see those sea surface temperatures that are in the central Gulf in the mid 80s, where, again, I talked about this yesterday, the most formidable portion of Delta, at least once it got into the Gulf of Mexico, was yesterday. We saw it as a Category 4 at one point when it was in the Caribbean, but yesterday was really when we saw it its most powerful, before we started to see that slow degenerative process where it got a little bit weaker and a little bit weaker. And so, a lot of folks were questioning, hey, why isn't it going to rapidly intensify? Because this is case in point. Temperatures there in the upper 70s, just off the coast of Louisiana, that southwest wind shear disrupting that core, taking that vertically stacked cylinder and just disheveling it a little bit, blowing off the cloud tops more towards the left or towards the south instead of a perfect cylinder. And all of those elements, thankfully, Stephanie, have come into the favor of Louisiana.
Yeah, and like we were talking about, the mechanics of the storm being that they look for that great fuel source in the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, really gets that latent heat of condensation. It's like fire on tinder. It just goes and goes. And then above, in the upper part of the storm, in the top of the atmosphere there in the upper storm, 50,000 feet, 60,000 feet and above, you need exhaust. You need to move all that mass out. So when it was a bit further south, when it was in the just under the cusp of the Yucatan, I'd say, that shear that is now working against it and kind of making it more skewed diagonally was helping to fuel that exhaust. So you had that nice fuel coming in from the Gulf of Mexico, rises up through the storm, makes it real healthy, and it's got a perfect exhaust up above. And then, with this shear coming on through, now it's kind of adding more friction to the case, and it's just blowing off that circulation, that round structure that we'd like to see, or rather not like to see, that the storm would like to have as a component. It likes to be that perfect round buzz saw, and with this trough that's been moving in from the west and dropping down, giving our friends out on the west coast a little bit cooler, drier air for parts of the Four Corners region and all that, helping to guide this storm out. It's what's going to contribute to that fast forward motion as it whips itself across the southeast here, but really taking that storm and pulling that moisture out. You see that here on the water vapor loop. Those brighter shades are those deep pockets of moisture in the upper atmosphere. And that band of orange you see there, that's dry air. It helps us kind of tell where the trough is. We look for these steering elements in the middle part of the atmosphere, and water vapor shows us the top. So it kind of lends us a hint to where that trough is pushing in, moving eastward. And so with it, just rips all that moisture up into the northeast, and it's going to help to take it up. Oh, did we get news here? Yep,
just got it. So I'm sorry to interrupt you. I'm going to come back to you. So officially, Delta has made landfall over Creole, Louisiana within the last 2 minutes. The Doppler radar imagery in the Air Force aircraft indicates that the landfall, again, Creole, Louisiana, just 2 minutes ago, winds were at 100 miles an hour, still a powerful Category 2 on the Saffir-Simpson scale, and we're still getting reports of winds near 70, a sustained wind of 77 miles an hour in Lake Arthur, where our storm chaser Jim Tang is, gust of 96, and storm surge inundation in that freshwater canal locks of 8 feet above ground level. So officially a landfall, Stephanie, here in these last couple of minutes.
Yeah, that we've been, when you start getting near that landfall, you get those hourly updates, and that's what we've been waiting for throughout this broadcast, is to see if we were going to get something in between, because it was a slow nudge across the coastline here. But as you heard, there it is. And something I'm seeing in this update is that the landfall in Creole, Louisiana, that's just 10 miles east of Cameron, which is where Laura came ashore. So some similarities here, eerie how close these tracks are. But yeah, as you see there on the live sweeping radar, that's not missing radar data you're seeing on the bottom of the storm. That's dry air doing its thing and the storm falling apart. So good news there. Still coming in as a Cat 2, 100 mile per hour maximum sustained winds, gusting higher. That's an intense experience for folks there, and it'll be interesting to see what news we get from Jim down there on the ground, experiencing this storm firsthand. But there you have it. We've got our landfall here for what's now our 26th storm of the season, now on this day here in October.
Hard to believe, Stephanie, and we were both on the air at 2 a.m. when Hurricane Laura made landfall. I'm relieved that we're on the air together at 7 p.m. Eastern time with a landfall. So, I'm also relieved that it's now, we've seen it cross over land and we have an official landfall. So the degenerative process will be ongoing over these next several hours, not minimize what's going on down there. I was actually surprised that they kept the wind at 100 because I know they've got ground-based sensors down there and they're still getting readings in that neighborhood, but structurally on radar and on infrared, it just looks so sloppy. I was really thinking they were going to tick those winds down, but officially still 100 mile per hour. Powerful category 2, and now it will become an event of rain, still sustained winds of category 2 for at least a few more hours, and then it will become category 1, and then we'll transition from a wind event to an ongoing flooding event, which is already a problem. That started yesterday, and that's going to continue through the overnight. And Stephanie will be tracking that all weekend for you because that's really a big risk that a lot of people think that they don't have to prepare for. They a lot of folks don't think, oh, it never floods at my house. Well, guess what? If a hurricane tracks right over your house and it's even if it's moving like this relatively quickly, some of those bands can create brief flooding conditions, especially if you live near rivers or streams that flood easily. The Mississippi, is had a ton of water this year, and we've seen flooding, up and down the river, but on the smaller tributaries because it's just been so much water that has, had nowhere to go because it's been so wet in this area of the country. So I think, Stephanie, what we'll do is, because we've been on for about an hour, let me take a quick look one more time. And let me, I've got the radar up on WSI. Oh, actually, Damien's got the questions up. Damien, I got that little bit of a delay, so I don't see him just yet. But if we've got a few more, we'll shout those out. And then I think we'll take the live stream down, and then we'll come back up here, maybe try and get Jim Tang live. We're trying to do that as we speak. So we'll try and get him on the ground and see if we can talk to him. But I can't actually see the questions there, so I'm going to just look real quick on YouTube.
And Leslie, while you're picking those up, something I want to tell folks about that we're seeing in this update from the National Hurricane Center, 6 p.m. Central Daylight Time. We told you about the Lake Charles radar being down. So hurricane hunters typically don't do missions close to land because we have those land-based radars to kind of pick up on things. In the Gulf of Mexico, we have several buoys, and we told you about some of the reports coming in from there. And there are other radars in the area, but it's interesting to note that they were also using data coming in from the aircraft to kind of pinpoint this landfall and give us that call there. So just goes to show they got a lot of tools in the toolbox here, and they know when to use them to put people's lives and property in the highest regard with safety. So a big effort here on behalf of the National Hurricane Center, the Air Force, and NOAA partners in general to try to track down this landfall here.
Yeah, and I don't see any new questions, Stephanie, other than some people. We've got a lot of people in Texas watching. Thankfully, the bulk of the worst weather is going to avoid the Galveston area. There's certainly heavy rain there now, but most of that wind is going to stay to the east of them. I don't see any additional questions on YouTube. Let me just take one more quick look here. I think that'll do it. So, Stephanie, as we wrap things up, any thoughts on this hurricane? And we'll join you guys again here in a little bit with another update. Hopefully, some additional video from Jim, and hopefully we'll get him live too. Cellular service becomes a lot more tenable when you get into these landfalling systems because cell towers, fall, collapse and are non-functional. So, any last-minute thoughts here that you want to add to this before we wrap things up?
Just thanking the folks for sticking with us. Of course, we're going to continue our reports. Just because we got a landfall doesn't mean we're done. As Leslie said, we'll continue on this evening. The next intermediate advisory comes out in about an hour or so from the National Hurricane Center. And as this thing moves inland, we're going to see it fall apart pretty swiftly here. So it'll be interesting to see what data they come out with. And I'm looking forward to this thing just falling apart and hopefully having a lesser impact as it makes its way inland for folks.
Absolutely. From your lips to God's ears, as they say, without hopefully offending anybody. But, anyway, we want to thank you guys that were hanging with us. I know there was about a dozen or so that hung with us through this entire broadcast. We had a stream that was over an hour. That's a long time. A lot of people probably were coming in and out. So thank you for sticking with us again with our official landfall of our 10th named storm in the United States, a Delta making landfall in the last 8 minutes. just at 6 o'clock straight up Central Time. Now will make that arduous track north and be impacting most of Louisiana, most of Mississippi, and then headed into the Mississippi and Tennessee River valleys tomorrow and beyond. So Stephanie Lauber and I will join you back here for another live update soon. As she mentioned, there'll be an update from the Hurricane Center officially within the hour, so we'll hope to join you back here, and then we'll have more coverage. Our next full advisory from the Hurricane Center will be at 11 p.m., and then we'll have a complete wrap-up of everything tomorrow with Stephanie with the fast forecast, and she'll be here with the duration with her and Damien heading the ship as we head through the weekend. So you guys, thanks for stopping in, joining us tonight. Stephanie, thank you as always for your great insights, for being such a young, and without hopefully if any being so, fresh on the scene, knowing so much, having so much knowledge. It's a great resource to tap into. So instead of us old timers that have been around and know these storms, unfortunately,
we appreciate your experience.
Oh, I'm not old, right? I'm just experienced. So anyways, I'm both. But anyways, you guys, thanks for joining us. We'll see you back here with another live stream here in just a bit.